So welcome to the Gamer Assembly podcast thingy. Today we're talking about GM tips and typically tips for new GMs. Somebody completely coming to GMing and DMing for the first time ever. Go ahead and introduce the group. We'll start with Matt.
Hi, I'm Matt Miranda, general gaming antagonist and frustrator of many other people here on the channel. You can find me on Twitter at MMARANDA.
All right, and moving on to Brian. Hey, Brian.
Hey, I'm Brian, otherwise known as Brian LaBerge. If you're on social media, you can find me at Brian LaBerge. If there's a hashtag in front of it or an @ sign, it'll be @ Brian LaBerge.
Awesome. I'm Jim White, better known as TW Wombat. I am on Twitter as TW Wombat. And hi.
All right, and I'm Brent Newhall, your friendly moderator for today. So today we're talking about tips for completely new DMs, folks who have not DM'd or GM'd or run a game, tabletop role-playing game before in their lives. Maybe they haven't even played before. Maybe just, watched some Critical Role or Dice Camera Action or something. What tips would we have for them, particularly any mistakes we made early on?
Sure, I've got probably three major things.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is don't worry too much about the rules, as long as you have enough to keep things running, even if it's wrong but fun. That's important. Two is don't challenge your players, challenge the characters.
Okay.
That can become a really hard thing when you put a puzzle in there that is something you expect to be easy and nobody else gets.
Mm-hmm.
When you're new, it's really hard to recover from that. And three, roll some dice and have fun.
Yeah.
Yep. Jim, how about you?
My first GM experience was with the, good lord, the box set back in '81, I think, and I was playing with my father, and he rolled up a thief, and I broke out B2, and we went for it, and his first question was, "Why am I here?" And I didn't have a good answer for that. So always check with the motivation, check with the characters, check with what's going on, and just, like Matt said, roll with it more than anything. But always have a reason for what's going on, because if you don't have a reason, that's when you get stuck.
Mm-hmm. That's a good one.
That's solid. I mean, I think what Matt said, and this is number one, is really great, which is don't focus on the rules too much. And to that end, if you know your rules, great. And when you get to a point where you don't really know what the rules are for it, just use something similar and move on. If you can set a quick difficulty level and roll a die against it, if you can do a quick bonus or penalty, something really simple that you can steal from another part of the game, great. And I think the best advice I wish I had when I first started was don't discourage your players from ruining your ideas. If you're playing a game and the players really want to do something and you think it might somehow ruin the fun, or you just don't know what's over there yet and you really thought they were going to do Y instead, I would say absolutely embrace what your players think is interesting. Embrace what they want to do. And even if you don't really have that fleshed out, run with it as best you can. You can make up the rules, and then after the session, you can look up what those rules really should have been and do it the right way next time. There's nothing wrong with telling your players that you're doing this, in fact. Just be open about it and let them run with what they're getting excited about.
Totally. Yeah, I like to tell people, read the rules as much as you can before the first session, and then read no rules during the session. Learn what you can, and then just kind of go for it. I think one of the things new GMs often deal with is fear. That question of, oh my gosh, I'm doing this for the first time, it's going to go completely pear-shaped. Jim, do you have any suggestions for folks dealing with that kind of new GM jitters?
It's not so much if it's all going to go pear-shaped, it's the fear of, I'm doing this wrong.
Yeah.
And that's something you got to get over real quick if you want to GM at all. Because it's going to be wrong, it's going to be your game, and that's the point of it. Make it your game. Going back to something that Brian said, if you're completely stuck on something, just give it a 50-50 shot. I mean, take something from the Coin's Hard Edge, or just, roll a d20, 11 or better, they do it. Just
right.
Move on. Get past it.
Yeah. Do you think that's something that is just something that folks deal with, in terms of that fear that you just kind of get over it with practice?
to me, it's a lot like stage fright. It's still going to be there every time you open the books and every time you sit down at the table, but it gets to be more friendly, for lack of a better term. The anxiety's there. You are pumped up. You are like, oh my god, if everything goes south, what the heck am I going to do? And then at some point, you just got to let it go and play the damn game.
I think it's a carryover from being a player, whether that's a player of video games or a board game player, or even being a player in other people's games. You feel like that never happens, that a situation doesn't occur where there isn't a rule for it. And so when it happens, it feels wrong. And you want to either push people back on the beaten path or, back to where the plot is, or just say no. And if you don't do that, it feels wrong, because in a board game, there's never that option where you're really making it up. In a video game, it seems like everything's either allowed or not allowed. And a good GM often makes it feel like everything's been prepped the whole time. So when you are that first GM, as soon as it's not written down in the adventure, or you don't know the rule, it feels like, oh no, I've done something wrong. And I think that's, to going back to what I said before, that's really why I would have liked to have that advice when I first started. Because I shouldn't say nobody, but you rarely hear people tell you that it's going to go off the rails immediately. And that's part of the game, that's part of the fun, and to embrace it. Because everything else, all these other games that we play, since we stopped playing pretend at very early ages, have this structure. And as soon as you're in charge of this area that has no structure, we have so little to compare that to that it just feels incorrect. Even as adults, when you're going through life and all of a sudden there seems like there's no rules for something, your instinct is, oh shit, I screwed up most of the time. I did something wrong to be here.
Totally.
Wrong.
Yeah.
Points that both Wombat and Brian really brought up were that, it's going to go pear-shaped almost immediately. Your players are going to go left when you expect them to go straight or right, and you have to roll with it. And that might mean suddenly reskinning your adventure to be whatever they're doing. Just because you nail a plot hook for them, just because you say this is what you're going to do tonight, doesn't mean they're going to do that. And when you're not ready for it, the reaction is to say, no, do this. And that's a video game. That's not a role-playing game. That doesn't give them the freedom. Say yes, and make it up. And as long as your players are smiling and having fun, or totally stressed out because you made it a great challenge and they're into that, you're doing the right thing.
Yeah. Let's talk about, I think for a lot of DMs, their first DMing experience is with Dungeons and Dragons. For better or worse, that is the entry point for most people into the hobby. Is there anything specific about Dungeons and Dragons, do you think, that new DMs stumble over, or have problems with?
I think one of the biggest problems with D&D is its biggest accomplishment, which is the wealth of lore and resources at your disposal, so that when you're a brand new DM and you're running adventure either you made up ahead of time or that was pre-published, and all of a sudden the players want to, again, do something unexpected. Like you're supposed to go to the inn and talk to these thugs, and instead they want to go to the library. And you say to yourself, oh, I've got to find the librarian stat block. Because it must exist in one of these books, or, the stat block I have prepared just isn't going to be good enough. And at the end of the day, unless you really know where that is, and you know from your memory that there's a really good reason why it's worth 2 minutes to look this up, don't bother. Let them go to the library and use that thug stat block you have in front of you, at least at first. And, just because you're in a library doesn't mean the librarian's not a thug. That's fine. You can make things work. And I think that's, when it comes to D&D, that's what's almost scary, is trying to live up to what you've seen and read.
Well, and I mean, would you say that is also true, saying to the entire panel, of like specific locations where, you know, I'm in Neverwinter on the Sword Coast, they want to go to speak with whoever is running, you know, Neverwinter right now. You know, you get that fear of, I don't know who that is. I didn't read up on that part of the Sword Coast, you know, book.
And that's where your game diverges from the published material.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, that's as simple as it gets, because way back I was running something in a pre-published, and somebody is more familiar with the material than I was running it, and he said, "Oh, this is the blind guy in here, and this and that," and suddenly the entire adventure collapsed because he ran around the end, and because he knew what was going on, got to the end of the adventure before they even started it. So, so at that point, I said, "Okay, no more. Everything else is coming from me, at least partially." And that way nobody else can really know what's going on.
Yeah, Brian touched on this, and again, Jim said one of those major things. There's a lot of lore out there, and there's no way, if you're running this, you're necessarily going to have that all in your head, especially starting out. And even if you're not starting out, why put this in your brain when you don't have to? So if you're playing the Forgotten Realms, they're your Forgotten Realms. If the Lopen Lord of Neverwinter is now this blind beggar that you really liked the idea of, and they're the ones who are running things. That's the way it works now. Make sure your players are aware of it, but they can't. The books and novels that they've read and said, "Oh, these are so great, I want to play in the Forgotten Realms," that's an alternate universe.
And I think that's great. I totally agree with what Matt just said, but it's so hard for people because oftentimes the whole reason why you're running in the Forgotten Realms is because your friend or friends got really excited about the idea of running in the Forgotten Realms. And so when you're not the person who knows the most about the lore, again, you're setting yourself up with that expectation. Oh, I want to recreate this. I want to create this world that my friend is really excited about. So the idea of going against what they know to be true or just making things up is really intimidating because you feel like you're failing your friends. And you've really got to figure out what your social contract is at that table. You know, playing with your friends is different than playing at a convention game. When you're playing with your friends, it's really easy to just open up and say, I know you guys know a lot about this world that we're in. So if you know something is coming up, we have to be really open about it, not keep it a surprise. And you've got to tell me, hey, I think X is coming up, because there's a very good chance that I have no idea that it's there. And then I'll have to decide whether or not that's true in this version because I'm ready to do it or not.
Yeah.
And that doesn't have to be the exact conversation. You need to tailor that to your table.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're playing a convention game with strangers and you're never going to see each other again, it's a whole lot easier and safer to do exactly what Matt said and say, okay, this is our version of the Forgotten Realms today, and you might think you know what's coming up, but just know that this is a brand new universe, this is a brand new world.
And if you have friends who know a setting better than you do, great. Sit down with them and say, okay, I want to run a game in this area. Tell me everything there is to know about this. You know, and let them give you all that information and download it. So you can say, okay, maybe we'll do, you know, I'm thinking of doing something like this over here, and they can provide a lot of that information as well.
Or again, if we keep talking about the Forgotten Realms because that's the biggest campaign setting Wizards of the Coast TSR has released. It has the most stuff, the most books, all of this. You know, run it in the Forgotten Realms, but okay, we're on the Sword Coast. That's a thing everybody vaguely knows about because that's what I read about. But we're going to start in this little tiny village because I'm starting to run this game. About those big places that have all those scary names that everybody knows about.
Right.
You know, start there. And, you know, sure, they want to get to Waterdeep. They want to get to some other place, Neverwinter. They can travel there, but in the meantime, you get to learn how to be a DM as they're learning how to be players before they get to that place that you need to read up about and you need to know about. And even then, by then, you hopefully will feel confident enough to say, these people are different people from what you read in the book, or the book is 50 years before this time now. They're different people.
Yeah.
Well, except for the elves. I guess they're still alive. But.
let's move off D&D for a bit. If somebody wants to get into this and maybe they're not heart set on D&D, are there particular games that we would recommend to new dungeon masters to start off with? And maybe it's not an ideal game to play forever, but something that's maybe a little easier to get into running a game of. Are there ones like that you can kind of jump into and do more easily?
I mean, I think that Dungeon World, which of course feels a lot like D&D as far as the setting is concerned, is a great game to learn with, because the book itself almost reads like a manual for new GMs at times. It has a lot of advice on pacing, on what to keep in mind while you're running the game, that isn't about mechanics, but is about setting the right feeling at your table. And it's a great book to read, even if you're not immediately running it, but you just want some really good advice. So I absolutely recommend Dungeon World as a first-time GMing system.
That's good. Jim?
I would recommend something like something really light, like a Rhesus or a Lasers and Feelings type of thing. That way, there's you have a D6 roll, and that's it. That is your only mechanic. That covers everything, and you get to fill in all the details. You get to make the world from the ground up if you want. You get to, these are your characters. These are the challenges they face. Great, crazy go nuts. Play with it for a while, and then figure out what everybody kind of wants to do, and then you can shoe in that way. But just to get something up on the table with zero prep, go for something really light like that.
Yeah, makes sense.
If you don't mind, Brent, I'd like to interrupt Matt before he gets a chance to speak in true Gamer Assembly fashion, because what Jim just said is wrong, and he's a good guy. Don't get me wrong. We all like Jim, and we appreciate that he has opinions. Just in this case, I would really suggest against those types of games, like Lasers and Feelings and Rhesus as the given examples, because as a new GM, you're often not going to be comfortable enough to improvise the entire game. And that's what those games often really make you do, is there's so little structure that until you're really comfortable creating a cast of characters and a story on the fly, it can be really intimidating, it can be really difficult, because you just don't have that toolbox to go back to throw things at your players while you're trying to figure out what's going to happen next.
Perhaps middle ground there would be, say, Doe Pilgrim to the Flying Temple, where there's a fair amount of explanation of what this game is about, but the mechanics are a little simpler. Matt, go ahead.
So I'm kind of pissed with Brian for interrupting me, because it was supposed to be my chance to speak, you jerk.
Yeah.
But, more importantly, I do sadly agree with Brian. I don't know that Dungeon World is ideal for a brand new to a game DM. I'm not sure there ever is one, especially if you've never played the game before and you're just filling in for your friends to make this all happen. But I would say the middle ground between that is something like Swords and Wizardry Light, or some of those other OSR, here's 6 pages which have all the rules you need. They just don't have the adventure and the details about how to set the tone and some of those other things that are good background to have. But they do have bloggers and people talking about them and resources online, which you can learn from. So it's not the core game. The core game is like 7 pages plus spells. That's everything you need to know, and it has those rules for swimming and movement and climbing and all, whatever you need ish. A little bit more detailed, but. So that's why I would veer towards something like that, a light rule set that is complete.
Fair enough.
Matt, is there a game like that people have heard of you can recommend?
Well, I did just say Swords and Wizardry Light. Most people into the OSR scene have heard about Swords and Wizardry, but you don't like anything that starts with O?
Point. Any final thoughts before we move into our final words?
Yeah, just as a quick rebuttal, I get where Brian's coming from. The thought behind that is if you have something really strong in your head with the tropes and the setting, like a Lasers and Feelings type of thing, then the rules get out of the way. The rules are just there, and you know what's going to happen in an episode of Trek, basically. And then you can just go with that and make the rules fit what's in your head.
And actually, to that point, I know a lot of folks who come from sort of freeform role playing online, and they try to come to tabletop role playing, and they find D&D and OSR just way too crunchy, and so they can take a Rhesus and kind of grok Rhesus, and then once they get that, then they can move on to something else. So sometimes that works.
I was actually going to go for Fate Accelerator, but I thought I'd let Matt or let Brian do that one.
But again, you violated the original argument of somebody who's never come into an RPG, never experienced an RPG at all before.
Well, that's true.
Right.
That's a good point.
They're starting out and they're running D&D for their friends who have also never played. They may have read books, they may have read all this other stuff, but they've never seen an RPG system, played the rules, or anything else.
Right.
That was the thing you had said. Find the best system.
I agree. I was just adding that on as, by the way, if you have some experience there.
Yep.
All right. So Brian's gonna murder us all in our sleep now. So let's move on to our final segment, the final word. We each get 30 seconds to have a final word. Nobody can contradict or counteract what you say. What you say is set in stone for all time, and this will be your final word on GM tips. So you have a few moments here to think about that, while I thank everyone here for being involved in this episode of the podcast. We have plenty more planned, and we're going to go down. We'll do Matt first, and then Jim, and then finally Brian. So this is your final words on this. Matt, what do you say?
All right. For a new DM, keep everybody happy and smiling and having fun. It's going to go off the rails right away. So be ready to just move whatever you had as an adventure in one place over to the new place and make it look seamless. Nobody's going to nitpick you and critique you until ever. So just do it.
Sounds good. Jim?
In the words of Matt Colville, the map is not the country, the book is not the game. All of those things that are printed, that are there to help you, let them help you, and if they don't, you don't need them. Just play the game. That's it.
Well put. All right. Brian?
Go ahead and use Google. There's a lot of great adventures out there that are already written. And like we said earlier, it's not going to cover everything that your players want to do. So don't be afraid to steal one part of the book and just lie about what it was originally meant to be and add what your players want it to be as the setting around it. But it'll get you going, and it's a lot easier to flip through an adventure when you're trying to figure something out than it is to flip through 4 books. So take a look at those and look for people's reviews about what's fun and easy to run.
Sounds good. All right, those have all been set in stone for all time. Thank you all very much for joining us. This has been the podcast on DM tips. Plenty more coming, hopefully, maybe someday. We'll see how all this works out. And thank you all. See you next time.